Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Wood Elves against the High Elves in what I think one of the worst matchups in the game. The biggest problem, of course, for Wood Elves is, and kind of always has been, dealing with enemy factions that can bring a lot of shooting to the field that they themselves cannot either gun down with their own shooting or outnumber or outmatch in quality or anything like that. And High Elves are one of this used to be a problem with the Dwarves, who of course could bring powerhouse artillery and were resistant to the High Elves or Wood Elves' large dependency on magic damage, and they had shields on and armor on their archers, so they could out-trade very effectively in a strong front line. And High Elves are basically the same thing as for Wood Elves that Dwarves were, except their archers respond a little faster, and their front line is a tiny bit squishier. Their archers are also a lot cheaper, so you can simply outspam the Wood Elves and gun down their cheaper Glade Guard or match the scouts for range. So, in this situation, I did decide to bring Orion as my lord. Orion is fairly disruptive with his two different bombardment spells, and he does have Cloak of Isha for that greater survivability. He does cause fear and terror. He is immune to psychology and all that sort of stuff because he's unbreakable. Very powerful duelist lord. His only problems are low armor and low melee defense. Now, this should be a problem against the archers, but I'm hoping to use his mobility to kind of kite around them, as well as to nuke them down with his two bombardment abilities, or his bombardment and vortex ability. For my front line, it is entirely composed of Eternal Guard with shields. I do also have some Eternal Guard with shields here in the back in case my opponent gets sneaky with some heavy cavalry. Eternal Guard will trade rather favorably with High Elf Spearmen, though it will still be a bit of a difficult fight for them. Especially when backed by a Branch Wraith, however, they should definitely be able to win, and they will actually trade fairly effectively against White Lines of Krace because they do have a built-in armor piercing. Their melee attack and melee defense is also fairly respectable at 27. When veteraned up like this, they are looking at 27 and 48 melee defense. The baseline melee defense for them is, I do believe, 44. Their silver shields should also mitigate enemy shooting a decent amount. 2 units of Treekin are also helping stiffen up my line. Treekin are, of course, susceptible to fire damage from breath attacks, which, of course, High Elves can bring a lot of, or, for example, Phoenixes can do well against them. But otherwise, they do survive fairly well, even against anti-large units, which, of course, make up the majority, the bulk of the High Elf front line. And that is one of the other problems that Wood Elves have dealing with High Elves, is that they have a lot of anti-large. Cheap anti-large, more precisely. I do have a Branch Wraith coming in with Earthblood, the Penumbral Pendulum, as well as Call of the Woods for that AoE melee buff, and good old Other Trickster's Shard to reduce enemy magic resistance, which I'm hoping will synchronize well with Orion, as well as the 4 units of Glade Guard, which are mixed, 2 units of Hagbane Tips, and 2 units of Starfire Shafts. Here on the flanks, I do have 2 units of War Dancers with Azrai Spears, just there to shut down enemy large, like Dragon Princes and that sort of stuff. These guys are very mobile, they have very high damage, they're an absolute large unit. Killing powerhouse. They're very powerful. I definitely love War Dancers as our spears. Now, my opponent decided to go very shooting heavy, knowing full well that I'm going to struggle against that sort of stuff. He did bring, for his lord, he did decide to bring the princess on a horse, which is a little bit of an interesting choice. You'll usually see her mounted on a dragon. She does have quite a few of her abilities here. Trying to slow things down a little bit. Just have Dragon Horn, which boosts nearby allies' missile damage and weapon damage. She does have Foe Seeker to make her mobile, and a cool little ability here, Loose, which boosts nearby archers. And you can see she's actually positioning herself conveniently close to those archers. My opponent has brought a whole big skirmishing contingent here, 4 units of Illyrian Reavers. I have no real counter to them besides my own archers, who can hopefully shoot them down a little bit, and Orion, who can perhaps pick off a few models. My opponent also does have a unit of spears over here, as well as 3 units of spears making up his front line, a 5th unit of spears here on the flank, screening things, and then 2 units of White Lines of Krace camping out in the woods. White Lines do have a 30% ward save against arrow fire or against missile fire, and that could definitely make a bit of an impact in my efforts to deal with him. My opponent also does have a mage of a high mage with some decent spells on him. He does have Hand of Glory, which is a boost to melee stats, as well as Apotheosis, which is a cool little cheap heal spell that also causes fear. Also, my opponent does have 3 units of Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers, who, of course, with their Grape Shot can bypass my shielding on the Eternal Guard, pick at Orion and his HP pool a little bit, and just make themselves a general nuisance. My opponent also does have some archers with light armor who can hopefully shoot hopefully my opponent shoot some of my archers down in straight up exchange. So I'm pushing Orion forward, trying to bait out some of the fire from the Eagle Claw bolt throwers before just pushing forward, realizing that I just have to push in. Now, Eagle Claw bolt throwers actually have a very significant bonus against infantry. I do believe it is +8. You can see I'm casting some bombardments on these spearmen, just trying to whittle them down. It's important to get some damage done. You can see I actually did get some pretty nifty casts off of the Hounds of Orion against the Lyrian Reavers, and they caused quite a bit of damage to them. They're definitely susceptible to that sort of stuff. There is a bonus of +8 against infantry on the bolt throwers for every shot that is going out, and that makes them very, very potent against all of my infantry force. In the meantime, my Starfire shards or Starfire shafts are trying, and Hagbanes are trying to pick apart the Lyrian Reavers. You can see debuffing their speed, bring them down a decent amount, and just sniping them away at them. Over here, you can see the poor spearmen are getting diced up by Eternal Guard, who is simply superior in close quarters, and I'm now committing Orion, pushing straight into the heart of my opponent's army, just trying to plow through and do some damage. This unit of spears is very, very low, so hopefully I will be able to rout them fairly quickly. I did cast a Penumbral Pendulum on these guys, and that is actually what whittled them down quite that much. You can see in the meantime, I'm committing my troops in, just pushing them straight into my opponent's troops. You can see he gets a nice little ambush here with the White Lions of Crace. White Lions of Crace are a bit of a questionable pick, I think, against Wood Elves, because they're not great against large, and Wood Elves don't have much armor, otherwise, non-large units. I think Phoenix Guard was generally a better choice, though perhaps a lot more expensive. My Azrai Spears do collapse on the White Lions alongside Treekin, and this should be a fairly favorable trade for me. War Dancers with Azrai Spears, while not meant against infantry, actually will do a decent job. In the meantime, my archers are exchanging fire with my opponent's troops, but unfortunately my opponent has a lot of those very, very annoying Eagle Claw bolt throwers, and those guys will do quite a bit of hurt to my archers, and most likely rout them off. These Lyrian Reavers are also making life very, very miserable by sniping away. You can see my opponent has pushed his Mage of High Magic into the fray against the Branch Wraith. You can see a lovely Penumbral Pendulum does go off in the back line. It's absolutely massacring my opponent's light archers with light armor. Light armor is definitely not a bad choice against High Elves because it makes your trading a little bit more effective. Another bombardment does go down the Lyrian Reavers, disrupting a little bit, and Orion is over here rampaging around, making himself a nuisance, even as the Eternal Guard do push in, having routed off some of the spearmen out on the flanks. You can see them fleeing over there. The archers, though, are having a very, very bad time of things, and are definitely taking a lot of casualties, though I have managed to rout off my opponent's archers in turn. The Branch Wraith is slugging out with the Mage of the High Mage, and I do believe the Branch Wraith should win this fight, simply because it's a lot tankier of a unit, and it does, of course, have somewhat better melee stats. Hits harder, has a little tank, has better armor, better melee attack, and all that sort of stuff. Orion, though, is getting focused down very hard with his terrible melee attack. He is our melee defense and his terrible armor. He's very, very susceptible to shooting despite his slight missile resistance. You can see I'm trying to counter battery or shoot back at my opponent's Lyrian Reavers with my own archers, but my own archers are taking some absolutely brutal fire from the Eagle Claw bolt throwers. Anytime my opponent's princess is over here running amok, being an absolute nuisance, but my Eternal Guard has breached my opponent's front line, and is kind of laying the smackdown on all these enemy spears. High Elf spears, especially once they lose their, martial prowess, are very, very lackluster, in my opinion. They're barely a match, if at all, actually, for Empire spears, much less the other elf spears. You can see, unfortunately, the Glade Guard with Starfire shafts are taking absolutely brutal fire. That +8 bonus is doing some huge work for my opponent. You can see I do try to push Orion into the fray, and he's being attacked by a High Mage, but I do manage to terror out him off. And I'm now applying some nasty damage over here with Orion. Orion, however, of course, is very squishy, and like I said, he doesn't have the best of melee defense, so he's struggling a little bit against even the archers with light armor, and my opponent is shortly going to be able to go pick him off with the princess. Over here, the Branch Wraith is pushing in. You can see some Hounds of Orion disrupting my opponent's forces. Finally, the Eagle Claw bolt thrower is being shut down, and my opponent's White Lions of Crace are actually getting diced up pretty badly. You can see the War Dancers with Azrai Spears have been trading very effectively. They're only up to 18 kills, but with the help of Eternal Guard now and some archery fire, they're actually able to kind of collapse this very quickly, and are now getting backed by an Earthblood. You can see the White Lions have gotten some kills as well, though nothing too fancy and definitely nothing to write home about. And most of these would have been against the... they do have a somewhat thing of a concave here against the War Dancers. You can see the Branch Wraith is definitely struggling, getting beaten up. You can see poor Orion is now surrounded and getting absolutely mauled. My Branch Wraith is pushing into the back, going against this Eagle Claw bolt thrower, just trying to shut it down and buy me a little bit of time. But my opponent is charging him with the Princess, who, of course, while not being the most amazing of melee combatants, will do some damage to the Branch Wraith and potentially kill him. In the meantime, my Eternal Guard is pushing into my opponent's backline. You can see the Lyrian Reavers are pushing out and going after my unfortunate Glade Guard. Glade Guard, while being pretty decent in melee, will still get ridden down by Illyrian Reavers, who actually have decent melee attack and melee defense, and even weapon strength. They're not terrible in close quarters. And once I lose all my shooting, it's going to be a big problem because my opponent still has a lot of skirmish cavalry. He could just kite me for days. While he doesn't have very much ammo left, so he won't be able to kill me, he could potentially draw this out into a draw. Over here in the center of the fight, though, Orion is getting torn apart. He has hit his healing cap has become visible now, and he is kind of getting beaten down by the Mage of High Magic. He's getting beaten down by the Princess, and with his terrible melee defense and his inability to outrun the Princess, he's going to be in deep trouble. Cloak of Isha does provide a 44% ward save, but it's not going to be enough, and he does go down. Our Eternal Guard over here is taking some crossfire, but at this point, I should be able to kind of wipe the floor with my opponent's melee contingent. You can see I'm committing some Eternal Guard to chase down these white lions. Believe it or not, Eternal Guard will actually trade, as I mentioned before, very effectively with white lions. You can see these guys are up to 58 kills. A lot of that would have been against white lions of Grace, and they're now going to tear through some of these spearmen. These guys are tearing through these white lions. And despite these guys are going in 60 against 30, and that is of course favorable odds, but nonetheless they will actually trade fairly effectively. White lions don't have the best of melee attack. 36 decent but not amazing, and when they lose, especially when they lose their melee defense with martial prowess, they become very susceptible to spears. My opponent has successfully routed off all of my archers, which is very bad for me. As I mentioned before, he's going to be able to isolate me and pick me apart. Over here, the Treekin are absolutely whomping on the Illyrian Reavers. I'm fairly sure Illyrian Reavers are not meant to melee down a Treekin. Treekin are pretty well equipped to deal with that sort of stuff. Though struggling against the Princess, this is definitely going to be a problem. My infantry, in the meantime, is completely slaughtering the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. They're routing off all the remaining infantry my opponent has here. My Eternal Guard War Dancers with Azure Spears are coming back, and I'm going to be able to try to rally and kind of reform a new line. Unfortunately, my Treekin do get surrounded and do rout off here, as they do simply lack the support they need or to stick around. But one of the big problems for my opponent now is going to be the fact that while he can make these Treekin rout, he can't really pursue them. They're pursuing towards these War Dancers, and War Dancers, even beat up War Dancers, are going to turn Illyrian Reavers to paste, especially if they catch them and surround them and get an extended engagement off. Now, my opponent could definitely engage with the Princess. It definitely could be a bit of a pain that way, and you can see I'm trying to reform ranks, form a line, and kind of go net my opponent, try to just catch him. Illyrian Reavers don't have the best of mass, and my hope is that if I can pin him up against the edge of the map, I'll be able to finish him off. You can see over here this Treekin is actually getting torn up by the Princess. He's, I do believe, fighting her, which is a little silly. And a bit of, I suppose, almost glitch there. You can see these guys do come back. You can see my War Dancers with Azure Spears have popped but would have missed. I am trying to bait out my opponent's remaining arrow fire. This does give him a 44% ward save against missiles, so pretty cool ability. It does nuke down their melee defense by a lot. Their normal melee defense is pretty high, but nonetheless, I do think it's worthwhile here just to force the rest of my opponent's archery. My opponent does pop with Apotheosis, which is completely useless against the Azure Spears, but getting this rear charge in while they're isolated and weakened is actually going to be able to rout them off because he does have the Princes there and he's causing quite a bit of damage on the charge. So War Dancers are going to rout, but it doesn't matter. My army's coming and advancing onto my opponent. You can see his final infantry forces have been mopped up, and I'm going to be able to pull the Central Guard back into the fray. And while the War Dancers definitely take a bit of pounding, I've lost my unfortunate Branch Wraith and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to be able to start netting my opponent and kind of trying to round them up. So as I'm going to throw things into fast forward a little bit, just because there's a lot of posturing here. The Princess is going to be sniping away at my War Dancers with Azure Spears. There's nothing I can do much about that. And I'm simply just trying to spread out as wide as I can and net my opponent's troops in place. My hope being that if I can catch just one, maybe two, or of the Illyrian Reavers, I could force perhaps a morale check. You can see another Apotheosis goes down. My opponent's decision to just bring cheap spells was probably not the worst idea. It's definitely kind of, I think, paying off in a sense. I'm trying to net this Princess down and just finish her off. Fortunately, War Dancers with Azure Spears are taking a bit of nasty fire from this very annoying Princess. You can see another Apotheosis going down. I'm trying to bait my opponent with the War Dancers with Azure Spears, definitely trying to tempt this cavalry out. And now I'm just going to start spreading out, waiting on my Eternal Guard to catch up, and marching in to kind of net my opponent in place. I'm definitely regretting not leaving at least a single unit of Azure Spears in the back line, because that could have been incredibly useful in retrospect. My opponent does get another surrounded. With his incredible mobility, it's very difficult for me to kind of counteract these sort of pushes, but the War Dancers don't actually quite break. They stick around and inflict some pretty nasty damage. And now I am kind of able to start penning my opponent in. I'm trying to set up a box and encircle him, an encirclement. You can see my opponent does pushing against these War Dancers with Azure Spears, but I do get a lovely surround on this Princess, who is not quite able to disentangle herself. War Dancers with Azure Spears are routing, but with all this Eternal Guard in here, My opponent is just not able to kind of crush me. Even this one of the and at this point, there's a shatter and a Pyrrhic victory. So one of the cool things about wood elves and all elves really is that just like dwarves, they're fairly hard to shatter or break. They have a lot of their morale is fairly high. Their baseline morale is fairly high. It's probably only second to dwarves, and maybe chaos. And especially wood elves have a lot of units that have immunity psychology. Now, in this situation, I didn't bring a lot of them. I only brought Treekin and War Dancers as far as units of immunity psychology go. But nonetheless, that's still pretty respectable. It meant that Apotheosis was not as effective as it perhaps could have been. I was definitely getting some good value out of all of my units. I do believe that the best composition to defeat High Elves is definitely centered around Eternal Guard with shields, because they're about as cheap as you can go. Dryads are very susceptible to shooting, despite having physical resistance and decent armor, because they don't have that much armor, and oftentimes the High Elves can just shoot you down. They also lack the armor piercing to deal with White Lions, who I've been finding are a very common pick against Wood Elves, because of course they do have that missile resistance. I don't think Orion's a terrible pick. He's unlike Durthu. He's not susceptible to fire. He's less susceptible to archery because he's more mobile. And he does have those nifty disruption abilities. Brantraith, I just think is a staple pick for me. As far as I'm concerned, it's basically a staple pick. Definitely a very powerful unit. You can see both it and Orion racked up a lot of kills before going down, which could be attributed. The Orion and Brantraith going down could largely be attributed to some of my own Miss Micro. Eternal Guard performs very well. As I mentioned before, they trade fairly effectively with White Lions of Krace, and they trade rather effectively against Spearmen, especially when backed up by, say, a Penumbral Pendulum. Glade Guard, I think, are still necessary. You need some sort of archers. Perhaps Deepwood Scouts are better because they're not as susceptible to enemy artillery fire. But nonetheless, I do believe some archers are needed. Just to either shoot down enemy skirmish cavalry or shoot down enemy targets of opportunity and that sort of stuff. War Dancers I just think are a good pick. I'm not the biggest fan of Wild Riders in this matchup because they're very susceptible to being netted, and High Elf Cavalry can gap close on you usually a bit faster than, say, Empire Cavalry. You're fairly susceptible to being netted, and there's also the fact that Wild Riders are not very good against Lothern Seaguard, and Lothern Seaguard, while they weren't in this game, are actually a fairly common pick as well. Lothern Seaguard, of course, do have silver shields, and they have a bonus against large, so they will often just simply dice up Wild Riders. Definitely a good game to my opponent. Definitely managed to draw it out. It was definitely a bit of an interesting comp, especially the pick of the Lyrian Reavers. They definitely proved very effective, and I was actually impressed by how well they function as just a light cavalry. So definitely a good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, or anything like that, be sure to post it down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.